called Recapture the Rapture. And the inquiry in that book is effectively, what rethinking God, sex, and death in a world that's lost its mind. So how do we actually figure out both existential kind of assessments? What do we think is actually happening right now? What, therefore, do we think we ought to do next? And that's kind of what we call the, Choose Your Own Apocalypse, part 1. Part 2 is the Alchemist Cookbook. So that's kind of on the heels of Dave and Molly's Psychedelic Clubhouse, but it's saying respiration, movement, sexuality, substances, music. What are the tools that we all have that are available and usable that let us that we can kind of create basically what's the blockchain of conscious culture. And then the final part of the book is like, if we can do those things, like if we think the hour is late and the stakes are high, and we have discovered ways to, create inspiration, healing, and connection, like we can blow ourselves to God consciousness using household materials. That's the Alchemist Cookbook bit. Then what on earth do we do with it as we put this into gear and into culture, which, because we're tribal monkeys, we can't help but do. And then that's part 3 of the book, which is, and this is why Jesse is my honored guest here, because he was the originator of this phrase probably 4 or 5 years ago. I think I first heard you slinging it.
Yeah. Back in 2015, actually.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So part 3 of the book is how do we put peak states and deep healing into gear and into culture without putting it in the ditch? So that section is called ethical cult building. And ethical cult building was Jesse's brilliant phrase, and I knew it had a future. So I asked him a couple of years ago for permission to weave it into this story, and now we kind of get to come back full circle on it.
Yeah, full circle, man. And when we first had that conversation, it was an immediate, like, full body yes. Like, I just knew that was, sometimes you get a title through the ether, and you're just like the steward of it until it finds a more permanent home. So can't think of a better steward.
Fantastic. Well, so let's just we'll set the frame for folks, which is, back then, I think you just, you have a canny eye for great phrases. And at that point, I think, you were sort of saying, how do you build communities of influence, particularly online, right? That have a heart, that have integrity, all that kind of stuff. But since then, right, things have got a little cultier, right? In fact, right, this is no longer an interesting tagline. It's actually a commentary on our current state, and as we've seen with everything from, like Netflix and Wild Wild Country to the couple of documentaries on Nexium, to, I think there's even a recent one on Heaven's Gate,
yes,
on HBO that I thought was super interesting, all the way into Plandemic, QAnon, and any contemporary, just real-time unfolding right in front of us movements.
Yes.
So just curious as to what you're thinking and what you're seeing in this realm of, and obviously if we're going to try and define ethical cults, we also have to kind of point out and name what are slightly less than ethical.
Sure.
And just what are you seeing in the realm of assemblage of humans these days around powerful belief systems or experiences?
Yeah, I think we're just at the very beginning of the hockey stick on that, because people in times of uncertainty, either personal uncertainty, crisis of faith, existential stuff, or more cultural times of uncertainty, economic, social, etc., people are insanely driven to try and find certainty somewhere, and absent the ability or tools to generate their own certainty from within and to connect with others who are doing the same thing. If somebody doesn't have that, they're going to become easy targets for these sort of charismatic messages, these hyper hopeful sort of missions that just, promise everything and you don't even have to deliver. And so I think we're just at the very beginning of seeing this stuff. And I think within that, there's a lot of usefulness. If you hear a message that sounds incredibly hopeful, it's useful to look at what's the DNA of that message that really speaks to you. And do you need to go all in and to deliver, your blood and your firstborn and everything in order to get value? Or can you just say, hey, what is it about this message that really resonates for me? But dude, we're just at the beginning, man. I mean, there's so many parallels to what's happening in the United States right now with what's happened throughout other cultures, other countries, Germany and in the 30s comes to mind. There's just a lot of parallels, and it's a dangerous time for people who are just looking to replug their umbilical cord back in.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about that, because you were speaking about, hey, you were sort of floating a gentle thesis of the sort of by their fruits ye shall know them, right? Like,
Yes.
sort of listen to their message. Does it sound positive? Is it uplifting? And then something that I have found really sobering. I mean, I think the first shot I had of this was a wild ass kind of like ex-radical hippie professor in college, and he would always make us do the most whacked out history assignments. And one of them was to compare Charles Manson to Jesus, and to describe, what was the difference really. And I remember writing the paper. I was like, well, the biggest difference is that we live in the culture built around the myth of Jesus, versus we're living in a society that vilified and judged and separated Manson. And he had us watch, I think it was like a 1973 documentary. It might have even won. It was either at Cannes or the Academy Award, but it won for sort of best documentary of the year. And it was all original footage. It wasn't like one of those cheesy like CBS, reboots. And the thing that I remember being shocked by then, and it seems super duper true right now too, is, fuck me, man, 90% of what the dude said was spot on.
Which dude? Because I agree with you, but yes.
Charlie Manson. Like, you actually, you listen to those guys and they're like, hey, you're coming out of these really uptight Eisenhower 50s. You're sexually repressed. You're just going through the motions, following the rat race. This isn't really your choice. You were just trying to please your parents. It's really all about love. Great, 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 great. Check all the boxes. And then he's like, up is down, down is up. Well, I'm tripping, so maybe. And then, and then death is life and life is death. Well, yeah, on a fucking really philosophical sense. So let's go kill the pigs. Red rum, red rum. And you're like, whoop.
Yep.
And it's just that final few points that goes from love and light to doom and gloom.
Well, there's a lot of layers there. First is that, you referenced this influence of Jesus, and I think you and I would both separate Jesus, the man, the myth, the legend, from Christ consciousness. These are similar but not the same, and we're living in a time right now which is 2,000 years after the dude was purported to have done all the stuff that he did. So we got 2,000 years of filtering and editing and upgrading and amending and all sorts of other agendas layered on. So unless we got a legit time machine and we can go back a couple thousand years, there's really no telling what the guy was actually like. Whereas Manson is much more recent in history, and so we've got a little different filter to run it through. When talking about Manson stuff, all of this affirming and mirroring back to people what they're feeling, there's some Blair Warren is a guy who did some pretty interesting work on these dark arts of persuasion, as he called them, and from a marketing perspective, it's psychologically bulletproof. If you can help somebody understand that, hey, it's not your fault, if you can allay their fears, if you can encourage their dreams, if you can help them throw rocks at their enemies, if you can do these things, then they will automatically and subconsciously grant you authority that you may not deserve or be able to back up. And so, back to the idea of people striving and seeking for hope in a time of uncertainty, man, all it takes is a little bit of charisma, a little bit of social proof, and next thing you know, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you're slitting your wrist, you're doing something awful because it seems like the good idea at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So and I want to stay on this notion of folks peddling hope.
Yep.
Right. Because it feels like a lot of times that the post-mortems, like after things go off the rails, then everybody says, either that the followers were dupes and clueless, and the guru had feet of clay, they were a huckster, shyster, they were only on the make. But there is something really powerfully seductive right now. And I want to kind of keep building on the frames you've established, right? Which is what leaves us susceptible, what leaves us yearning or wanting the answer that someone is offering. And it's not just people getting hoodwinked. It feels like, the more we're in crisis and the more there's a community that offers certainty and especially a happy outcome, right? I mean, that's literally what the title of this book, Recapture the Rapture, is. One leg of that stool is that. It's to say, hey, we're willing to get seduced by rapture ideologies all over the place, and they're not all just suicide vests or wearing end is nigh placards. Like there's techno-utopian raptures, right? There's new age spiritual raptures.
Sure, there's the singularity, this rapture of uncertainty, but damn, it's going to be better than what we got now, and you're going to be a robot.
Yeah, we're going to crash the global economy, and blockchain is
Right.
going to fix everything.
Right. Just end any cryptic sentence with blockchain, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. So one I've been noodling on lately, and I don't know enough about it to have a firm opinion, but I've seen some folks starting to float critiques, is because you normally think that, like, alt-righters are somewhat, like those are the scary ones, or any sort of fundamentalist religious philosophy that really, has sort of violent goals for the other kind of thing. You're like, okay, well, those are spooky. But I saw a paper recently that was critiquing, like, Barbara Marx Hubbard, which I'm sure Jesse. She recently died. She was one of the kind of leading lights of that sort of baby boomer, transformational evolutionary consciousness, evolutionary spirituality stuff. And something that I have noticed in the kind of quote unquote consci scene lately, especially around COVID. In fact, it dovetails very, very specifically, which is, for decades, there has been this kind of almost what you could say is sort of crypto new age fascism, wherein there is a story to be told that, hey, whoever's hanging out, in a cacao ceremony doing their sound bath or whatever that would be, right? Whoever we are actually part of an evolutionary elite and elect. It is on us to carry human consciousness and culture to the next level of vibration, frequency, dimension, fill in the blank of the particular. And this is where, it's sort of, you can follow the argument, but the implications are spooky as fuck, which is, and not everyone's going to make it.
One of the most seductive stem cells of any cult is that this is Noah's Ark. If you're not with us, it's not that you're against us, it's just that you're fucked and you don't have much time left on this planet, this dimension, this whatever. And so there's this sands through the hourglass sort of feeling that, hey, if you don't make this step, we can't help you, and the train's leaving. And again, from a marketing perspective, there are very few things that create urgency like legitimate scarcity. And so whether it's climate change or it's economic collapse or the guy that you hate is about to become elected, all of this, it just feeds into people's, from my perspective, people's lack of either real life experience and being self-reliant, being able to navigate chaos, and rather than simply being resilient, truly understanding anti-fragility, as Taleb wrote about. And when somebody does that, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, sexually, any way that they can make themselves more anti-fragile so that they're able to actually not only navigate chaos, but actually thrive in it, not from an opportunistic or predatory or parasitic sort of way, but truly just assimilate all of the changing ingredients and just alchemize that and amplify it into something that's actually beneficial and good for them and good for others. This to me, this is the fork in the road. Is somebody looking to be saved, whether by Jesus, Manson, QAnon, Biden, or anybody, or is this somebody that can look in the mirror for a couple of hours and continually appreciate what they see looking back at them, not from a purely narcissistic standpoint, but neither from a woe is me, I'm this broken little bundle of cells. It's a slippery slope, man. And in my experience, it has to be continually refreshed. You got to continually hit the refresh browser or the refresh button on our browser of consciousness and let go of the past, let go of the future, become a little bit more present with what is. And there's so much sobriety in that. And it sort of makes one a lot more immune to these culty sort of messages.
Okay, so you're saying sort of a willing choice to take a stand for your own sovereignty, which, by the way, fuck me, man. I mean, terms get just co-opted left and right. Now,
Yes, let's. What the hell?
sovereign. I mean, for a while there, for like several years, I was aware of sovereign as like just like growing the fuck up, standing your own 2 feet, and claiming.
Right.
I was thinking mostly cognitive sovereignty,
Yeah.
like
And,
don't
and
let
now
anyone.
and now it means roll your window down 1 inch and yell at the officer your constitutional rights until they tase you.
Or yeah, like Duck Dynasty in Oregon, like taking claims on public land. You're like, hey, what? Like this was never allowed in some arcane reading of like an 1873 statute. Yeah, you're like, whatever, guys. So yes, anyway, we have to come up with new terms, but let's just say grown ass people.
I think that's a good one.
What I heard you saying is like, hey, even if the wheels are coming off, or if the world is uncertain or more uncertain now than it has been lately, but it generally, over the arc of human civilization has always kind of been this way.
Yep.
Take your stand, and make lemonade. Like it's on us to like that. Fundamentally, our relationship to reality is the thing we can control, etc.
Yes. Okay. And there's never a time that's not relevant. There's always, no matter what, there's always ways to navigate and to trend oneself in the direction of health and wellness and live and let live sort of lifestyle.
Okay, but so this is what I think is interesting, and that's it's tangential to the Barbara Marx Hubbard question. So I want to just put a pin in the map of like, are we on the verge of psychedelic New Age fascism? And that's the bifurcation of who has access to mind expanding, soul descending, fill in the blank psychedelics, entheogens, plant medicines, and who doesn't. Whether it's who is keeping their vibes high enough to not be susceptible to COVID, and if the poor fatty bastards who are eating refined sugars, et cetera, and are obese and kind of have it coming to them anyway. Like there's a whole neck of the woods over there.
Yep.
That feels like that shit could go dark, even though it's been fronting light for a while, and it's just a dissociative move. But the thing you bring up about it's not reality, it's our personal, individual, interior responses to reality, right? I think Adam Curtis, that wacky ass British documentarian who does those kind of crazy, he does mind fuck intellectual histories with a whole bunch of like mixed media jump cut edits in there. And anyway, and in fact, Ari, who's here, slung his stuff my way lately, so I took a bit of a dive into his world. And one of the things he said was that the civil rights crashes, so RFK, MLK assassinations, and all of the uprisings in 1968. I think it was the summer of '68, like Prague, Paris, London, like all over the place was going off, blowing up, and it really did, in fact, seem that there was going to be a changing socio-political order. And then they all failed. How long must they kill our prophets, right? So there was the extended grief of that. There was the throw on Janice and Jimmy, and then throw in Nixon and Watergate. And by the sort of early 70s even, everyone was kind of saying, oh, fuck it, you can't change the system. Cue up Bucky Fuller quote, you have to go create your own new one.
Right.
And the solution is a change in consciousness, which then gave us all permission to drop acid, learn Eastern meditation,
memorize spiral dynamics.
Leave the cities and the suburbs, go to do the back to the land movement, but effectively withdraw an internal turn. So lately, that's been and that has a critique. Like it felt really beautiful, baby boomer me generation, and you're like, oh fuck, that just got a little solipsistic, narcissistic, and it perfectly dovetailed with neoliberal market capitalism, which was all about the polishing your avatar of the rational consumer individual.
Yes,
right.
The sexy prepper.
Exactly. So just you. It's all about you, Cupcake, all the time, and I would say in the last couple of years, in a way that has surprised me, we are getting systemic structural critiques instead from both sides. And they're saying all of that navel gazing just makes you a patsy for the system of which you're a subset. We need to look at race class power, right? We need to go and re-examine whether it's alt-right or far left. They are effectively Marxist-like critiques. And they're saying, oh, none of that shit matters. You're not trustworthy. The system is stacked, and whether that's accusations of structural racism or, take your pick across the spectrum. So how do you square that circle, which is the relationship, like how do we become, I suppose, critical critical readers of that text, that it's all about my relationship to reality? And how does that not lead us to like a bourgeois bypass? And then also, what's your sense of like the zeitgeist right now, where a lot of like the angriest, most influential voices are seeming to return back to systemic structural analysis of what's wrong?
Well, you opened like 38 loops there.
Yeah,
I'll close my eyes and spin around in a circle and pick one.
Whatever you're called to, man. Whatever you're called to.
So yeah, this is something that I've always been sensitive to as long as I can remember. It probably has to do with, growing up homeschooled and always feeling a little bit outside of any system. Every time I hear things like we, society, culture, any political party, my immediate sort of philosophical conclusion, the end of all of those terms, is a sort of collectivism, which I experience and observe as very different from collective consciousness. And so the prizing of the group over the individual has a very dark underbelly, because people lose themselves very quickly. And when people lose themselves very quickly, and we can talk about self and what that might even be, but when people stop listening to their own intuition, when they essentially don't trust themselves because they've got lots of evidence of not being able to trust themselves, and they've got lots of external reinforcement that you're not smart enough, not good enough, etc. You screwed things up, you didn't make your bed when you were a kid. So they've got all this trauma, all this stuff that's bouncing around. Lacking self-trust, all of a sudden people start looking outside for not just safety and security, but they start looking outside for how to create a better solution. And so I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. He's, I would have said African American, and he immediately corrected me. He said, "Dude, I'm not African American." He said, "I've never been to Africa in my life. I'm sure, there's genetics, obviously, but I'm American, and I'm a Black American." I was like, "Okay, cool." So he said in his very eloquent sharing of his experience, he said, "Man, I just learned to keep my head down and not even talk about the race thing." He said, I don't feel oppressed. I don't feel in any way put down. I don't feel in any way that I need reparations or anything like that." And he said, "I recognize that that's my experience, and I'm not taking away from anybody else's." And it led to this really interesting dialogue about, me versus we. And when a group, back to the main point, when a group feels threatened, my challenge would be, how much of that group that you're identifying with, whether it's race, politics, religion, or just values and principles, how much of this group that is being affected, is being afflicted, how much of that, if you were to close your eyes and check your own nervous system and look in your life right now, how much of your personal life is being affected by what's happening to somebody 1,000 miles away or 1,000 years ago, versus the quality and the consciousness of the choices that you've made over the last, let's say, 3 years that have led to your life being exactly where it is today. I saw a great quote the other day. It said, "Well, well, well, if it isn't the consequence of my own choices." And that's the thing that hardly anybody wants to look at, which makes all of us easy pickings for the promises of hope and glory. And it's not your fault. And so, as a white American male who's, relatively good looking and incredibly sarcastic, all in one breath, I'm not super fucking qualified to talk about a race. I'm not qualified to talk about all this stuff. But I remember growing up in a trailer with food stamps, and I know I'm where I am because of choices and having tons of people help me out, mostly helping me by being a great example of what was possible. And so, for me, and honestly, that's part of the frustration that I feel consistently, is when I see people giving away their choices and making choices that are disempowering for them, for their families, for their friends, because of their identification with a group that's bigger than them, or a long time ago, or potentially in the future. In the meanwhile, they're paralyzed and actually not making great choices given what they say they want, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of branches off that too. And just, some love and appreciation, right? You referenced briefly your childhood and some fairly close to the bone living conditions and things. But just if it's okay for me to share, I mean, my understanding of those years of your life and the homeschooling and that kind of thing was not an under functioning family unit, but one dedicated to social justice that had chosen a particular pathway that wasn't necessarily economically compensated as fully as its value. Is that fair to say?
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
So how does it feel? How does it feel to be, in whatever way you relate to it, carrying forward some version of that family lineage?
That's a good one. As I'm on this conversation with you and everybody here, I'm in a suite at the Hotel Emma in San Antonio, Texas, and I can literally see the street, that the bus that I used to ride to go to karate when I was 13 years old, and I took that route hundreds of times. And since I got here last night, I'm in town for a client today. I have just been doing all of this, what I would call time piercing, and connecting to that memory and to the family that I grew up with, the family that I'm very close with today. And I wouldn't change anything that happened. And I feel an immense, like, heart-melting appreciation, not only at the experiences, but the many, many choices that my father, my mother did make to follow their values and the principles. And even though I would most likely make different choices today, I can't undo that, nor would I want to. And that's why if I hear somebody who is in pain because of something that happened 10 years ago, whether, or 50 years ago, whether it happened to them or to someone that they're identifying with, the question for me is always, how useful is that? What is it that you really, what has that caused you to want even more clearly? What has that caused you to believe in even more clearly? And if you can develop that as more of a well-formed outcome in the future that you'd like to move towards, then it's kind of simple to reverse engineer back to today. And what's the best next step that you can take?
Mr. Elder. Yes, beautiful. So I want to pick up the thread where you were kind of wrestling with the me to we.
Yeah.
Right. Individualism versus collectivism versus, I suppose, what was the term you talked about? Was it collective consciousness?
Yeah. Collective consciousness is sort of like, yes, that's a huge thing. We're all in this water swimming together. It's just that if the temperature changes, 500 yards away, and I allow that to paralyze me, am I really serving the collective consciousness?
Yeah. All right. So because and I feel like a fucking like a book groupie, but I think it's probably one of the things that's shaped my brain in the last year more than anything is this fellow John Gray at the London School of Economics, and he wrote a book called The Death of Utopia, Black Mass and the Death of Utopia. And he lays exactly this thing out, which he says, look, any social movement, and this could be seasteading, it could be psychedelic renaissance, it could be cryptocurrencies, and it goes all the way back to the Judeo-Christian beginning. In the beginning was Alpha, and at the end is Omega. There is a fall. There is a shot of redemption. Once you make it to the redemption, then it's happily ever after forever. And because the ends are literally heaven on earth in some shape or form, including Soviet and Maoist communism, right? They were they were exactly the same plot arc, stripped of Jesus. But the fact that they all follow that make them feel so viscerally truthy to us.
Right.
And that thing is, when the ends are heaven on earth or off it, then the means are always justified. And so at a time where it feels like we're super duper fragmented, and yet we have to figure out how to come together. What is your sense of what is the dialectic or the conversation or the balance point between the sort of radical sovereignty, right, that you're suggesting, with the intense and apparent need for coordination and cooperation, which requires some form of dynamic subordination?
Yeah, I will. That term, radical sovereignty, I would put a sort of parallel placeholder term next to that, which in my journaling and the way that it's come to me is hyper-selective interdependence. Meaning,
okay, meaning that's the good thing you're shooting for.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's an ideal. I know that there's no way that I can possibly tap into all of the conversations that are happening within the collective. There's no way that I would want to. I would never get anything done. So being selective about the conversations that I do choose to be a part of, what groups I do choose to communicate with, to contribute to receive and give value within. Once I sort of looked at that more meta perspective and realized I get to choose the conversations that are important to me. And dude, once, especially towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and it was like, man, you couldn't like snap your fingers without having somebody go, yes, and somebody else go, what did you just do? It's like, whoa, whoa. And I realized that, man, there's very few conversations that I'm finding useful, valuable, productive, because it just gets into these echo chamber circle jerks where everybody just wants to swap philosophies and everybody's left dumber as a result. And I know that's very judgmental, but I'm very proud of it.
It's Friday, dude. You get.
Oh, that's right. Okay, good. Got the hall pass. So here's the punchline. Once I got clear about what I envisioned, the larger future to be, the capital T, F, the future for modern world, trickling down to ancient or to third world perhaps. Once I got clear on what sort of future I would like to live in, I just zoomed it all the way back to me in that future, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And I started to get some pretty interesting pictures. And it looked a lot
as far as like running a simulation of your future self.
Yeah, absolutely. And so once I saw that, it was like, holy shit, that is compelling as fuck. That's awesome. And completely nonlinear. Not at all what I thought I would be attracted to or drawn to. Once I saw that and it began to germinate and I started to be really energized by that future, not just me personally, but how that me would be relating to the future that I envisioned, which, by the way, I see it as being, if we think there's fragmentation today, I think, again, we're just at the very beginning. I think there's going to be massive fragmentation, but that doesn't have to be bad. You know, there's a difference between playing chopsticks on the piano with 2 fingers and listening to a full-blown symphony. And I believe that there can be harmony even within massive fragmentation. So back to this concept of selective interdependence. Once I decided what conversations I choose to have and what conversations I don't have any value in and are not valuable to me, and I can make that distinction, I began to, literally within days, I began to meet, to connect with, to attract, if you will, conversations with people that had similar visions, but not redundant. And we began to trade ideas and start to look at what we were building and what are we excited about, what are we growing. And that excitement, that enthusiasm, as long as, in my experience, as long as that enthusiasm is directed outward and not in a possessive, Tony Robbins, more kind of a way, then it actually has a very powerful catalytic, positive, expanding effect on everything that it touches, the power of vision and all this kind of stuff. So interdependence on a very selective basis has kept me, dude, literally feeling happier, healthier, more on point, and more just more confident at my abilities to give and grow and to gain moving forward. And it's kept me out of the weeds philosophically. And I realize that sounds very self-centered, but Friday.
Yeah, man. Well, so there's 2 paths we can go down, but in the long run,
at least.
But what I'd love to just since we've already surfaced this bit, so when I was talking about how lately it feels like structural systemic critiques, globalism, neoliberalism, structural racism, you name it, right? Like we are seeing a much more of a return to the metasystemic versus the individual diagnostic, right? And in that, a response where I put that hat on, I would say, yes, Jesse Elder, good, good for you. But are you aware of how much freedom, choice, liberty, resource, mobility, et cetera, are the foundation upon which that super groovy thought experiment could be run? And if I have a dickhead landlord and I have intermittent work and I have a parole officer and et cetera, and I have a alienated parent who's not coordinating, then my choices as to the conversations I'm in are meaningfully reduced. So how do we do, right? How do we do this whole thing?
To that point, I would suggest that the choices maybe they're reduced. I would invite anybody that told me their choices were reduced to consider what would happen if they used the word different. My choices are different. And there's no question. I mean, you, me, probably many of the people listening to this room right now have options that are not available to many, many, many millions, perhaps billions of people. But then the question becomes, what are we going to do with this incredible gift of perspective that we've got? Do we direct our available attention and energy in a way that feels diminishing in order to give what we do have away to somebody? I know that's not what you're suggesting. Or do we make the most of this and expand as holistically and healthfully as we can and invite as many other people into upgraded choices as possible?
Beautiful. So in fact, that really literally tees up to the sentence a couple of paragraphs from the section on ethical cults in the book. Is it okay if I read it? And
let's rock it out.
All right. Because it says, which brings us to the third and least common version of cults in our survey, the ethical cult, where traditional cults demanded subjugation of the self to the lineage, and culty cults demanded subjugation of the self to the guru. An ethical cult does neither. Instead, it seeks to enhance the sovereignty of the individual while increasing the intelligence of the collective.
Yes.
That's a delicate balance. Rarely
that's so good, man. That's so good.
Check it out. It keeps going, but not
go,
for long.
Go.
So following, fucking, fearing, and fighting are easy and predictable responses. Feeling it all is much harder. Owning our own power while deferring to a higher power requires timing, humility, and skill. And this is where I want to give you the breakdown. So this is what these are your
Dude,
thoughts.
I have chills, right? Jamie, this is fucking brilliant, man. I've not heard this. Guys, I'm literally hearing this for the first time. This is amazing. Holy shit.
So if traditional cults were like taking your seat in an orchestra, and culty cults were like being in a marching band, ethical cults feel more like playing jazz.
Yes.
No sheet music or drum major to guide off, just us in the moment, listening for the pulse together.
Damn, I only hope I get a signed copy of this book, man. So fucking good. And so within that, this ethical cult that values equally and differently, values the individual, and then the role of the individual, the ability of the individual to positively impact the whole. Something that a distinction that I've observed between what you would call the culty cults and the ethical cults. Culty cults are very easy to get into, and they're very hard to get out of. An ethical cult is almost the opposite. It's hard to get in, but it's very easy to get out. Like, you do your thing. I've made more friends in the last year and a half who are deeply involved and ridiculously competent in the prepper space than I ever thought that I would. And I had all this, presuppositions and some judgments probably. I was like, man, these people are just, packing.
Were they of coherent of worldview and threat assessment, or were they heterodox in that realm, but all getting their shit together?
Mostly extremely proactive and not as fear-based as I thought. Extremely educated, looking at long economic cycles, looking at various examples throughout history of where things have flared up, et cetera, et cetera. And I was shocked to find a couple of friends in particular living in very responsible luxury, not in a bunker underground, not carrying snorkels around, not carrying gas masks and hand grenades and everything else. But
hand grenades are fun.
What? Yes, it can be. But what I found is that the almost not even disdain. There was no disrespect or disdain. It was really just an indifference. Like what I would call strategic ignorance on their part, of even wanting to have a conversation with somebody who wanted to buy their way into prepperdom. And the universal philosophy that I appreciate and respect so much is that skills beat supplies all day long. And you can buy your MREs and you can buy a shipping container, put it underground. That's fine. But if shit hits the fan, in their vernacular and in their worldview, if shit hits the fan, you just became like the gold medal. You just became the prize that everybody's going to come for first, because you're so well equipped and so unskilled. And so in terms of ethical cults, it's very hard to work your way into or to even be recognized as equal to somebody who is ridiculously prepared from Maslow's gauntlet from the ground up. It's very hard to be seen as an equal in that community unless you earn your way in. Similar with mountaineering, I imagine. That's not my background, but I know it's yours. It's exactly the same with martial arts.
Well, dude, I mean,
cool story, bro. But get on the mat. What's that?
Well, just to build on that, I mean, in wilderness medicine, our instructors will always say the most valuable thing in your medical kit is between your ears.
Yes.
And just the capacity, situational awareness, and the capacity to rapidly triage situations, and basically override threat response, enhance pattern recognition, awareness, and choice making, and get the fuck after it. Like be willing to iterate rapidly.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to be able to do that in 5 seconds, not have to go and sit and meditate and get some therapy and do all that for 45 minutes while the avalanche is coming after your ass.
Yeah. So now we're touching into, and by the way, folks, thank you all for being here. This conversation is kind of obviously what it sounds like, which is an exploration of end of times for stellar minds. Right, like where have we come from? What are we doing, and where do we go now? And other than that, I don't think there's too many guardrails on the dialogue. So let's. Well, fuck me. I mean, is it worth attempting at least provisional assessment of the meta crisis? Sort of what are there at least factors that appear to be salient, or topics or categories, without getting prescriptive, right? Because there's infinite opinions and conclusions. It's an uncertain, chaotic polynomial. Is that worth it, or just to say, hey, shit's kind of fucked up, we all know that, now let's get on to the other second and third order inquiries?
I think we can do it. I think that maybe we'll do some sort of volitional philosophical volleyball here.
Well, how about this? I mean, I'd love your integration and throw in your own editorial on what you've experienced with the prepper community. Because so, like, what is their sense of what's not going to continue working that they need to change behavior and do these things for?
Yeah. Okay.
What's your synthesis or take on that?
Yeah. That's an easy one. For those of us that live in Austin, you live in Austin, I live in Austin, probably, some people on here do as well. Austin, 2 weeks ago, experienced blackout, rolling power outages, sub-zero temperatures with wind chill, no water, no food for many, many, many people. And it was really, really rough for a lot of folks. I don't know what the total, physical damage or harm, or I'm sure loss of some life. I don't know the exact numbers on that. What I do know is that I got probably about a dozen texts from friends who know me well, and they said, "I bet you're having the time of your life, aren't you?" And I was like, honestly, yes, because I can afford to, and not financially. They go, man, talk about a weird moment. I left my building, and I live in a nice building downtown, and it's a hotel and blah blah blah. I left my condo, and I'm going down the hall, and a woman was coming back up the hall toward me from the elevator, and she looked very distraught. And I said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "We're trying to figure out food." And I was like, "Tell me more." And she said, "Well, I was supposed to fly out yesterday. I'm here visiting my son. He lives right across the hall from you. And he's got 2 small kids. They haven't eaten since yesterday morning. All the stores are closed. There's no food. We don't have any food. And I don't know what to do." I'm like, this condo is like, I lease, I don't own, but I price the condos. These condos are like $950,000. And there's no fucking food. And I'm not blaming anybody, because that could have very easily been me. And I can't imagine going through that with kids and, having all of that extra responsibility. But I tell you what, it felt really good to say, hold on, and to go inside and put together a quick package for her, bring it back out. This woman had tears in her eyes. She had a Louis Vuitton jacket. She had a diamond on her finger that could probably buy any car you or I could think of.
Yeah.
And she had tears in her eyes. And this is what really threw me. And I was like, man, 2021 is kicking off strange. She had tears in her eyes. Not tears of relief or gratitude or appreciation. She was ashamed. And she said over and over again, she wouldn't even look at me. She said, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed. And I just put my hand on her shoulder and I said, hey, if our situations were reversed, what would you do? She's like, oh, I would do this and this. I said, yeah, well, we're all part of the same cycle here. It's like, it could have been any one of us. It's not your fault. But man, I left there and just felt so much, I don't know what I was feeling, man. It was just very intense. And so all of that to say, Austin had this experience. Most people were completely unprepared. And yet those that had a little bit of forethought, without coming from a place of fear or panic, but just like, what if this happened? And just do a quick, algorithm stack. If this, then that. If this, then that. If this, then that. And sort of smooth out the rough edges emotionally to where you can think about it from a place of empowerment and, kind of like you're getting ready to go on the playa and go to Burning Man. You better take some fucking water if you like your life and don't want to dehydrate out there. That's not scary. That's smart. And so I think for somebody to sort of do these little war game scenarios with themselves, not from a place of, oh shit, although when those emotions come up, to your point, you can just sit with it. You can just feel everything there is to feel. Don't need to judge it, but we can use that information to make better decisions. And I truly don't believe they have to be fear-based decisions. Even though some of the stuff that I am preparing for would have scared the shit out of me 3 years ago. But now it's like, no, I'm not scared. I'm actually more confident now about the world and about the direction that our species is taking. I'm more confident now than any other time, but also because I've played in the dark a little bit, and I've gone into the weeds, and I've gone into the sort of psychological poison ivy that a lot of prepper space has. And I realized that, what, we're all just trying to do the same thing here, man. So, there's a lot that we can learn from each other.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things though is are we mapping the same hyper objects, right? Like is because very little of this is actually just primates, ensuring glucose to the brain and keeping up core body temperature. Right. There's so much fucking story on top of it, and we're stumbling through objective 3D with completely different overlays about what it all means. So like at some point those narratives that guide us and drive us and cause us to project on each other and use rules of thumb for decision making, taking your shortcuts and everything that we do, the narrative layer matters because it informs whether you're friend or foe, whether I'm a Samaritan or whether I'm a tough lone wolf, whether I'm what we ought to do based on that script. So I guess a question that I would have is what are the redemption songs that unite us?
Yeah. Man, I love this question. And your language is so good, man. It's like a sort of psychic bath all in itself. This redemption song is not any different than it's ever been. We need to connect, and we'll connect through misery over non-connection, but just settle for that. Can we connect through, and by we, I mean, whoever's listening to this, if you think of the 2 or 3 people that Warren Buffett did a speech a couple of years ago about who his friends were. And he said, in a nutshell, he said, think about World War II and the Jews, in Germany and everything. He said, my question is, who would hide me? That was Warren Buffett's criteria for friendship. Who would hide me? And so, if you're listening to this right now, think about, who would hide you? And I don't mean just from a scary perspective, but from a bonding perspective, a trust perspective. Then those people that are in your life, what is the level of dialogue that you're having about what's present for you, what you're scared of, what you want? And I would challenge anybody to allow yourself to be temporarily but relentlessly selfish. As cliche as it sounds, it's not inaccurate to fill up your own tanks first so that you have more to give, not just resources, but your vibe, your frequency, your energy. When you walk into the room, do you suck energy out of it or do you fill it up? And if you fill the room up with energy, are you doing that transactionally? Or is that energy coming as a natural byproduct of you just living your own fucking life and kind of being happy with who you are, including all of your flaws and imperfections? So that may sound, very abstract, but I found it and observed it in the people who I respect so much and the people that I love to spend time with. These are resilient motherfuckers, but not hard-hearted resilient, open-hearted resilient, flexible, able to move, and yet able to be leaned on as well. So who are the people, that you've got in your life? And double down, triple down, quintuple down on those friendships and those relationships, because those are the people that you want in your own hyper-localized hive mind.
Nice. Well, you actually changed gears because so I was reckoning that we would probably pause at the top of the hour and then just take any questions, riffs that folks have. But before that, I wanted to share with you one more passage. But then what you just said,
and I will real quick, Jamie. I am unfortunately going to have a pretty hard stop around 4, so
perfect.
We'll do what we can. But yeah, let's lay this passage on.
All right, so this was inspired by your riff. Aristotle laid it out succinctly when he described the 3 most common forms of friendship: the transactional, the hedonistic, and the virtuous. I think the virtuous was what Buffett was talking about, right? The transactional bond is unapologetically mercenary, a quid pro quo where at least one member is only in it to get something they desire. The hedonistic relationship persists for as long as it's fun. When the party moves on, so do these friends. This kind of connection has become especially abundant as more people start playing with ecstatic technologies. The party at the end of time is attracting more than its fair share of gatecrashers. Both angels and moths are drawn to the light. In and of themselves, there's nothing inherently wrong with either transactional or hedonistic relationships. They only become problematic when it's not clear what kind of connection we have with each other, and we start mixing and matching the euphoria of peak states and the vulnerability of deep healing. The virtuous relationship is a much rarer and more valuable commitment. That's the hell or high water in sickness and health, no man left behind kind of bond that is required to safely support each other through rougher weather and challenging terrain. That's what it means to have each other on belay. This is almost done. The first step in connectedness, Tyson Yunker Porter explains in his book Sand Talk, how indigenous thinking can save the world. I told you about this book, it's rad, and so is Tyson. The first step is forming pairs, like kinship pairs with multiple other agents who also pair with others. The next step is creating or expanding networks of these connections. The final step is making sure these networks are interacting with the networks of other agents, both within your system and in others. So we need to take our duos and turn them into dozens, and take our dozens and turn them into dozens of dozens. A flexible meshwork of homegrown humans radiating across the world, doing the real work that needs to be done.
I would drop the mic, but it's in my hand, it's in my phone, and that would end the dialogue. So, dude, fucking great.
Oh, I'm stoked, man. So yes, and by the way, like I check it, I got the actual hard copy galley, so I got a box of the first look book. So I will be popping one in the post for you.
Or I'll just come by and pick it up. That's awesome, man.
Nice. Well, dude, that sounds like an awesome spot to pivot. And let's just see if anybody has any thoughts, comments, or questions. And then here's the quick request. And I hope that Jesse and I did a halfway decent job of modeling it, which is let's pay attention to the rhythm and the musicality and the possibility of the conversation, the dialogue, because Clubhouse seems like it has adopted the conference default of the death by panel discussion, and you end up with conversations that don't build on a melody. They're just punctuated equilibrium. And so if we can do our best to let us keep going and let us subordinate something that we thought we wanted to say a few minutes ago for what is the next best offer in that moment as the music has progressed, then that's the request, that's the invitation. Cool. So with that, let's go ahead and bring up, is this Ancila or Anchila? Are you there?
Sorry.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I had a prepper moment a couple of years ago, and I was a host on an online TV show, and I invited over someone who ran a prepper forum, and one of the things that he said that always stuck with me was that most preppers are women with children. Like once you're a woman and you have children and you start to realize like, oh shit, I'm in charge of like these tiny human lives, something shifts for you.
Wow.
So that's a fun little anecdote.
I will never know exactly what that's like, but it makes sense.
Yeah, right? So that's something very unexpected that I didn't see coming, that I thought was like a funny anecdote that always stuck with me, that I thought I'd share with you guys.
Love it. It resonates with everything that I've observed and experienced. I mean, the driving force behind this deep nesting, and not just nesting, but like nesting meets Fort Knox meets Garden of Eden, is extremely driven by deeply maternal, feminine, mama bear energy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of, I think Sweden's been doing this for years, at least 5, maybe longer, where they distribute to all citizens these pamphlets, these prepper pamphlets. And it's basically like, in the event of war with Russia, like an invasion by Russia, globally, like climactic collapse or collapse of the financial systems, et cetera, here's how to get your shit together. And they 100% move out through the channels of, women and homemakers and oversight of families. So it seems very, very pervasive.
Yeah, actually, I'm in the Netherlands, and a couple of years ago, the government also did like some campaign that recommended that people would have some supplies for at least, I think it was 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And it's so easy to do. I mean, it's so simple. Even if it's just, every paycheck, just grab a couple of extra cans, grab some beans and rice. I mean, grab some spices. It's not difficult. But I think many people are avoiding that because they don't want to think about the implications. But once you pierce that veil and you can actually think about it with a smile on your face and a sense of adventure, it really, really changes things.
Nice. All right. Now, Andrew, I believe, has been with a hand up for some time. So awesome. I hope that you are here and nationwide, man. How about it?
Can you hear me?
Andrew.
Can you hear me okay?
There he is.
Yes. Hi. Thanks, gents. I love this this conversation. The ethical cults piece is something that I've been just contemplating for some time. I mean, the documentary is just rolling out. Jamie, you alluded to earlier the Nixium and Wild Wild Country, and like how many times do we have this story repeated before we start to wonder, hey, maybe it's not just some charismatic weirdo that's pulled off.
Did Andrew just get jumped by a charismatic weirdo, like in real time?
Sure. I think that might have happened. I think unless that's his background static. So it could have been a rapture. It could be like he's not there anymore. It's like the leftovers.
Ascended.
His fucking phone is just on the sidewalk somewhere.
Dude, talk about a testimonial for our Clubhouse, man. We actually one person actually ascended.
Yes, exactly. But to that point, and I think Andrew must be here because that's where all the windshield noise is coming from. But the notion of those documentaries and the less than happy outcomes for a bunch of those communities. One of the things that struck me about that Heaven's Gate one was that they actually were just a regular old hippy dippy new age 70s UFO cult for ages. Andrew, is that you? Are you making your way back to Signal?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I had dropped out.
Yes. So were you on an interesting jam, or had you just?
I was, but I can recap it. I was just I was saying with respect to the ethical cults, I don't know where I dropped out.
We lost you at the sum up of the Netflix documentaries.
Right. So, how often do we have to hear this story before we realize that it's not just a random charismatic fellow that's pulled off something crazy, or there's something else going on in terms of the way that we relate and to connect to one another that results in these stories repeating, right? And the suggestion that it's not so much the content that these folks are offering as it is the methods, right? The shared the connection, the shared symbols and rituals, and the ontological certainty that these sort of structures provide. Can you still hear me?
We got you, man.
Okay, good. I didn't know where I had dropped that. That they provide. And so then you start to, especially with the use of tools like non-ordinary states that are really useful for showing people or releasing them from sort of the rigid grips of the, value systems or frameworks that are not serving them. But then it's a blank slate after that, and I think that's really the question, is that there's not a guarantee that what you reconstruct once you've sort of wiped the slate clean with psychedelics or meditation or fasting or sleep deprivation or whatever it is, there's no guarantee that what you put in its place is going to be useful. Often it's just a reaction to something, cue Charles Manson, right? So at that point, what we really need to realize that it's the connection itself and the really intentional way that we then rebuild the symbols, the signifiers, the frameworks that we sort of are going to put into place.
Yes.
And that becomes about not being extreme and reactionary and going from one pole to the left, right? From extreme right to extreme left, but really starting with where you are. So in connecting with the self, and then reaching out in proximity, right, to what's closest to you. Like, what can we actually share? What do we actually value? This is the jazz, right? It's not actually playing from a script or some kind of magical thinking that the law is outside of us, right? It's dancing and listening to one another in those moments, and then expanding it, and then expanding it, and then expanding it. But the challenge we have now is that there are some pretty rigid cults out there. The takeaway for me from the Wild Wild Country documentary that I loved was that it's easy to come away from that thinking like, oh, they're just they're kooky and went crazy, and Osho was a madman. But like you said, a lot of these folks have some really interesting things to say. I mean, pick your
Osho was a G,
right? What and the takeaway on the terms of the Wild Wild Country documentary for me was like the story a lot of people didn't pick up on was that just the bigger cult won. Like America kind of was not really comfortable with this other thing kind of coming up inside it, and decided that it was going to push it down. So we need to find ways to connect to these bigger, really rigid systems, and that to me strikes me as the challenge we have right now.
Nicely said. My big takeaway from Wild Wild Country was like, holy shit, you mean you can teach fucking blissed out hippies to drive D8 tractors and earth movers and build a city from scratch for free? Holy shit. Like, that is one of the most mind over matter expressions of a community of practices, like, literally like wattage, like their output in 3D of anything I think I've ever seen.
And that's worth something. I mean, similarly, you've got what's his name from Nixium helping people cure their Tourette's. These are powerful tools, but just because we're releasing people, all right, people are able to be released from certain rigidity with them, doesn't mean what they're going to be replaced with is going to be useful or beneficial. But then it starts to ask some really big questions about what's possible on the other side. And if you think that at the bottom of it all is kind of chaos and conflict, or it's love, and maybe it's both, and if it's both, then it's like, how do you reckon with and dance with both of those aspects of reality?
And what do those individual words mean to everybody involved today? And do they still mean the same thing they meant to them yesterday? Do they all have the same agreement? This is where clunky mouth sounds get in the way. But it's a useful dialogue. On that note, Jamie and gang here, I'm going to have to jet. But man, this has been so fun.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Look forward to catching up again in the real world, man.
Yeah, man. Very soon. Much love, everybody. And Jamie, I know you're going to continue to surf the waves with everybody here. Have an awesome Friday, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers. All right, Pamela, you're up.
Hey, thanks, man. This has been great. Sorry to have to say see you later to Jesse, but Jamie, thank you. The thing that I wanted to kind of bounce off of, in addition to what Ancilla said about being a parent and preparing, and then everything you guys have been talking about, to me, it all stems down to the fear versus love, conversation. Like when you're at your kind of clearest center and you're being intentional with your decisions, whether it's around prepping or whether it's around a new project or anything, for me, the best I can ever do is just choose love, right? And just whatever the highest, clearest, connection to that I can find, and then that's always my compass. And I just would love to hear you, Jamie, because you're someone I really respect in the space. How do you handle that?
Well, which bit of that?
In terms of, just using a compass, right? Like, is love versus fear a compass that you, subscribe to? And how do you navigate it in the moment? Like, what's your practice?
Oh God, multivalent and never-ending, and only occasionally successful, right? So, but I think you can actually unpack it as a trainable protocol, and the somatic sensation is I go from living behind my eyes, like literally kind of up in my head, up in my story, probably coming from a fixed mindset, doing all sorts of games that people play, running around in a drama triangle, like that kind of a thing, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and seeking validation from my fixed identity constructs, like that jam, versus coming into a fully vitalized, engaged, integrated somatic self system, whereby you're more thinking, feeling, perceiving, and if anything, your center of gravity is descended from behind your eyes more to your sort of, it could be your throat, it could be your solar plexus, kind of heart, chest, even belly area, and you're almost like a sort of a human satellite dish, and you can literally feel that which is congruent with sourcing from or yearning toward life force, and that which isn't. I mean, like literally, we can hear beautiful music. We can hear a funky jam. We don't need to be able to read sheet music or know classical theory to be like, oh yeah, that is fucking jiggy, and I cannot help but, right? And we can do
Yes.
that with, in general, more broadly, life and other humans. And it feels like there is a dividing, like, because then the interesting thing is that when you submit, when you surrender to being lived by love in this life, and you become and your sole goal is no longer ginning up any of those fucking stories, like all that bandwidth gets given back, and you're just expanding your umwelt, or the realm of reality that your senses can perceive, apprehend, and act on. And that is basically a vitality play. Like, can I just keep my circuitry juiced enough to be able to pull down that subtle signal? And if so, then I'm no longer in hypervigilance. I'm no longer doing any of because I mean, how much of our human time is spent in the deep now, like in the actual fully embodied, expressed, and perceived present moment? Most of us are constantly kicking off into painful pasts, or perfect pasts, or fearful futures, or fantastic futures. We're virtually never here now. But here and now is the only place that our prefrontal cortexes and our opposable thumbs are co-located in time and space. It's the only time we can think something and do something about it together. We could be present in our thumbs, but our minds are fucking elsewhere gathering wool, or we could be in some other location in time and space in our minds doing some past or future scenario planning, and then have no access to our thumbs. So not only do we get to turn off the monkey mind chatter, gain back all of that bandwidth, simplify our life to just, is this in the light or not, right? We also get to become more fully home in our skins, so that we can engage. And I think that maybe arguably you can make the case that that's a backwards ass definition of functional sovereignty. You're not really sovereign until your mind and your body and your thumbs, right? Your brain and your thumbs are in the same space, and you have fully integrated your neurosomatic system such that you are sensing, thinking, feeling, and perceiving from your whole self, the center of yourself, not simply the narrative upstairs.
Well said, man. Very, very well said. I mean, that was poetic. I hope someone was recording that somewhere. Yeah, that was great. I mean, for me, I can echo a lot of what you said, and you just put it perfectly. Elevated.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Daniel, let's get you up here, mister. What's the good word?
Yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to discuss the I'm sorry, the timing didn't quite line up. I'm getting distracted by things in the 3D world right now. I'll just mute for now.
Luke.
Can you hear me?
We got you, man.
Oh, I came in a bit late to the conversation, but I've gotten so much from it. And one thing that really stood out, I don't know if it was Jamie, you saying it, or I think it was Jesse, but talking about cults and how they're so easy to get into, but really hard to get out.
Yes, that was Jesse's.
I was in a cult for 20 years, and it took me 10 years to get out of it. And what's so interesting is that there's a family connection to this cult that I was in. And so it made it really hard for me to feel a sense of safety and security within a family dynamic. But my wife grew up Mormon, and I was never really into the religion, but the parents were really kind, and they were always into food security and like stocking up on food and stuff. And they never preached or promoted their religion on me, but I always had a stronger sense of security and comfort when being in their home as opposed to my own. So it's just interesting where in the cult there was always this promotion of you don't need anything, that security is within you, it doesn't matter where you are as long as you have the inner peace and all this stuff. But when it comes down to it, if you don't have the food and the water and the shelter, it's really hard to be on cloud nine. So yeah, I just wanted to chime in and share that experience that I've had.
Wow, man. And so that was your childhood experience, was with a family member overlapping into a cultic experience for you, and then
more
subsequently
more into young adulthood.
Okay. And then were you with your wife and got to experience her family during, before, or after your experience in the different cult?
During the cult, and it helped me get out of it. It was a way for me to sort of step outside of the bubble and be on the outside looking in, whereas before I was just on the inside. I couldn't really see it for what it was.
Mm-hmm. If you're comfortable, do you mind sharing the name of the cult, or the type or style or orientation of what it was about?
Yeah, the style was very similar to the Netflix documentary that was previously mentioned, The Wild Wild Country, rooted in Sufism. The leader I'm not going to mention, but it was someone from India that came to the West and gained a lot of followers. And there's many of them out there, and he still practices today. But he's not as popular as he used to be.
What techniques of ecstasy were common? Like, was there breath work, chanting, sexuality, psychedelics? What was the meditation?
It was breath work. Yeah, the techniques that were taught were they were shared in secrecy, and you weren't allowed to tell anybody. But you could, do a YouTube dive, and you could easily find these techniques. They've been around for thousands of years, but they were presented as a secret that you couldn't share with anybody else.
Mm-hmm. So were they not dissimilar to Kriya?
I don't know what Kriya is.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's certainly, just different, fairly advanced and esoteric, and oftentimes fairly, closely held breathing techniques.
Right. Okay. Yeah, there was four techniques that you would do over a period of an hour at least every day.
And then here's a curiosity I've always had, and this is true with sexual yogas and other things as well, which is that there can be there's a protocol or a practice that definitely does something. So you will have a definitive state experience. But then what they use is they say, see, that's real. You must trust that. Yes, yes, yes. Check, check, check. Okay, now my ontological explanation for exactly what that is and what it's about and why it's happening, you also therefore have to accept, because the truth of your somatic experience is undeniable. So there's a lot of smuggling of what would otherwise be, hard to defend worldviews that through people's softened boundaries. But does that track for what you went through?
Yeah, there's some similarities to that for sure. I mean, I undoubtedly felt extreme bliss and joy in deep meditation, and there was a lot of spiritual bypassing in my practice. But it also, it just puts blinders up to so many other things, and it, when you start digging into it, there are abuses that are hidden, there are families that are broken apart and destroyed, and it's all under the attraction of peace and love, but then there's this very dark shade that comes from it.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody here in the room has experienced. There was a recent article in Walrus, which is kind of like I don't know, it's sort of like a cool journalistic literary kind of magazine. Wade Davis, the ethnobotanist, has written in it, and so did this woman who was doing she had been a member of Chogyam Trungpa's Shambhala community, of which Pema Chodron came out of. Lots of teachers he founded the Naropa Institute in Boulder, and and he was a legit OG Tibetan, educated at Oxford, came to the States and really was one of the more radical, crazy wisdom novel interpreters of the Dharma that, kind of set foot in that kind of 60s, 70s, 80s era. And I had always had this understanding that he was just clean and legit, that there had been some scandalous shit. He drank, he partied his ass off, he ended up, dying of sclerosis or something, but he also did it like a gangster. Like they would sit down and get into high ass meditative states while slinging back liquor. So anyway, that was the whole story I heard. And then this new article in Walrus just this year speaks it seems like it overlaps with your experience, Luke, which was that a number of the second generation kids in the Nova Scotia community have now they've sort of decoupled from it, and they're beginning to tell their stories, and they're beginning to connect each other's dots. And there was this kind of there was both blurred sexual boundaries with adolescence, there was kind of dereliction of parental oversight and responsibility, and there was this kind of the dark side to the bliss out.
Oh, absolutely. And I like Walrus magazine. I think they're based in Canada. It's a great magazine. I'll definitely look for that. And what you mentioned, Pema, like her coming out was, and making her stance was a big deal, because she was a pretty high profile individual to actually come out and just say, you know what, like I have to step down from this based on all this other stuff that's come out. And thank goodness.
Yeah, no doubt.
Anyway, thanks for letting me share that, and thanks for this conversation. It's been super inspiring, and I've gotten a lot from it.
If I could just chime in one more second too, because I've gone through the Kriya initiation, and Kriya is a huge part of my life, and I suppose I am really lucky in that who I ended up finding as a teacher and leading me through the process is someone who's very, very humble, and someone who never would put himself kind of on the pedestal of being a guru, and is very generally critical of the organizations and the possible the power trips that can happen, and the things that can cross boundaries and be dysfunctional and harmful. And it's a shame, because Kriya, the techniques, like you said, without a doubt, there's so many breath techniques, there's so many meditative techniques that are so transcendent and so powerful. And then it does open up, the opportunity for people that have their, their issues to take advantage. So just wanted to chime in, because since you said Kriya, I did want to just say that it's something that's been a hugely positive impact in my life, and certainly haven't gone down any of those routes.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, and let's just also acknowledge, the power, the potential, and the pitfalls and the perils of techniques of ecstasy, right? That they both sort of create a manic upswing in available juice, and then also a softening or eroding of boundaries, so that full consent is not necessarily always available. With and breathwork's badass, and yes, it's having a moment, right? But Kriya's been at it for ages, and the benefits are strong. So okay, folks. So what I'd love to do, if it's cool, is just I'm just going to read a short couple of paragraphs that kind of hopefully kind of sum this up and put a bow on it. Coming from the book Recapture the Rapture, but this is just about specifically the things we've just been talking about, these communities, and what is the pull. What is the special and particularly potentially increasing pull these days for communities like this? So this is on top of all that. Things have been getting super weird lately. For all the reasons we've discussed so far, the collapse in authority, global systemic crises, and tangled mythologies, it's increasingly difficult to tell what's around the bend. The seductive pull of rapture ideologies beckons. The more uncomfortable and the less certain we are, the more tempting it becomes to find comfort in community. And the most tempting community to latch onto, the one that confidently proclaims to know exactly what's going on and is certain it's going to be standing on the right side of history just as soon as whatever big time crazy thing that's going to happen happens. Rapture ideologies are like a giant ontological vacuum devouring everything in their path. That slow sucking sound as you watch friends and family slip down the conspiratorial rabbit hole, it's not a rabbit hole. It's the black hole of the intertwingularity as all of our end times, end games blend together. And no one, except the chosen few, gets out alive. We should expect conditions to worsen on the road ahead. The year 2020 saw an exponential uptick in all four of these dynamics: generational amnesia, ecstatic technologies, digital influencers, and rapture ideologies, overlapping and amplifying each other. As plagues, fires, famine, and floods, to say nothing of global cabal secretly running the world or imminent alien disclosure, ricochet around us, it's hard not to read into things. Signs and portents abound. Omens of millennia are everywhere. Meanwhile, the echo chamber of social media is taking our shadows and turning them into monsters. By the clicking of our thumbs, something wicked this way comes. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us. That was an awesome way to spend a Friday afternoon. Like I said, this will be kind of an intermittent, kind of intentionally happening thing around this time each week. We'll continue to pull sections and passages, share readings and riffs on the content of rethinking God, sex, and death in a world that's lost its mind. So thanks to everybody. Have a great weekend.